Good evening, this is Angela with Parker's Permaculture. Welcome back to Hausfrau Friday. This is a video segment where I talk every Friday about ecological homemaking, those kinds of traditional domestic skills and domestic philosophies that are not tied to a paycheck but are crucially important for the running of most of our households and all of society. So whether or not you are a full-time homemaker, there are topics on Hausfrau Friday that will be applicable to you. So this is not the video I had wanted to make today. In fact, I had a really fun cooking video planned, but at about 3 a.m., a member of our household tested positive for COVID, and basically the spit has hit the fan. So I spent most of the day running to pharmacies to pick up various prescriptions, including I'm super grateful that our insurance has covered Paxlovid for us. I obviously am not sick. I had a negative rapid test, and so I felt comfortable going out to the pharmacy and doing a last-ditch grocery run so that if we need to hole up and quarantine for quite a while, we can do that so we can keep folks in our community safe. So I had planned to do this great cooking video today, and I will get back to it. Culinary skills are something that I really highly value and are something I think can be lacking for a lot of folks. I came from a household with a mother who was an exceptional cook and taught culinary classes and ran a gourmet club and was very skilled in that area. And so I had the benefit of an upbringing that was steeped in culinary skills and the value of traditional cooking. But I know a lot of people have not had that privilege. So I would like to do more cooking on this channel on the Hausfrau Friday segment, and I hope to be doing that more in the future. But today, I want to talk about something that has been on my mind a lot, and I've noticed that folks might have a little bit of a preconceived notion about who I am as a homemaker and what kinds of people get into homemaking. So I think that it's obviously a really fundamentally important part of certain traditional religious sects of people to have a homemaker, a woman homemaker, to see the housewife as a really crucial part of not only the running of a household, but also of a religious devotion. And I think that's well and good. I come from an evangelical background. I was raised Presbyterian. My husband actually went to seminary. And we started out as a pretty darn religious household. And I don't want to get into too much in this video why we no longer attend church. I think we are still deeply spiritual people and folks who are deconstructing from a toxic evangelical background. And that is a really long and ongoing process and not the subject of today's video. But I do want to say I have a tremendous amount of respect for folks who are homemakers as an aspect of their religious devotion, because I think I was one of those people for quite a long period of time. In American culture, we have kind of a mythology about homemakers. I think folks can very quickly assume, erroneously, that homemakers are inherently religious, inherently women, and inherently in heterosexual married relationships, and typically have children as well. Because there is a segment of our population for whom that is true and for whom homemaking is a part of a religious practice. But I want to caution us against making the leap to assuming that all homemakers fall into that demographic. And especially, I want us to hold back judgment and reserve judgment when we see other people who engage in homemaking as a career, that they must be white, straight, and married, and must have kids. And that the only people for whom homemaking is a valuable and important career are religious people. All of that, I think, is doing a disservice to the career that is so important in so many households and that is so necessary to our culture. And that I think so many ways our culture is struggling right now is because we have devalued homemaking as a profession. We have devalued the unpaid labor that homemakers do. And we have lost so much by losing so many homemakers out of the culture. I have noticed a number of homemaking social media groups. The focus is on a submissive wife, on being a housewife, on being a traditional homemaker, on being a trad wife, which is like, oh, that's a whole other, let's not get into who trad wives are right now, but on being a Proverbs 31 woman, on this kind of intermingling and tying together religion and a particular kind of religion and homemaking, and how the only way to homemake is to fall into this framework of being a Proverbs 31 woman or a helpmeet. And again, as somebody with a deeply evangelical background, and somebody who, when we lived on the Central Oregon coast for 2 years, was submerged in really toxic fringe evangelical culture. Not even evangelical, it was Gothardite culture. It was Michael and Debbie Pearl culture, who wrote this horrible abuse manual called Created to Be His Helpmeet. Probably going to tick off people that I'm not going to shy away from my feelings about that book. It is a particular brand of Christianity that is very fringe, and we happened to be completely subsumed in it when we lived on the coast for 2 years. And I felt like I was living in an alternate universe, and it was deeply traumatic for me and for both of my daughters, even though they were young. But it was very much this tying of really important fundamental homemaking skills with a kind of spiritual abuse. And I think for so many people that are deprogramming and deconstructing from that kind of toxic religious background, it can be very easy for them to reject the concept of homemaking as a vocation because it is so commingled with the toxic spiritual abuse elements. But I think it's important that we know that homemaking doesn't have to have a religious bent to it. It can have a healthy spiritual and religious practice mingled in with it. But for those of us that have borne witness to or been harmed by religious practices that are toxic in nature and coercive in nature and abusive in nature, it can be hard for us to extricate homemaking as a career from those elements that are harmful. And when we see other people engaged in homemaking, it can be really easy for us to make prejudgments about them based on our own religious baggage, based on our own ideas about homemaking and religion. So for me, there was a religious aspect to my homemaking initially, but that was not probably the core of it. The core of it was that I wanted to push toward a more sustainable way of living. And I wanted to raise my children in a way where I had a deep level of connection and time commitment with them. And so for me, I think it was much easier as I pulled back from the toxic religious influences in my life and disconnected from them and started to heal from that trauma. It was much easier for me to take my homemaking with me because I knew that it was so much more than just the idea of being a helpmeet, so much more than the idea of being a religious homemaker. For me, homemaking is about the value of running a household, the value of doing unpaid labor that is decoupled from a paycheck, decoupled from capitalism, and how necessary that labor is to our society in terms of raising children, in terms of volunteering and being a presence in the community, in terms of running a sustainable household that seeks to live a more environmentally responsible life, a life that is separate from consumer culture, a life that wants to have earth care, people care, and fair share. Again, permaculture channel, all of my homemaking is informed by my permaculture. So again, so many groups focused on homemaking are also focused on their religious practice. I would encourage those of us who have a different religious practice or don't have a religious practice to know that we have a commonality with other homemakers in terms of the skills around the home. For me, I struggle with my parenting is very different. Perhaps I'll talk about this in another video. From a lot of religious homemakers, that is one thing that really caused me to begin to separate from my religious practice is that we practice completely nonviolent parenting. We don't use discipline. We don't use punishment, that's for sure. Combating childism is a really important part of my homemaking, and perhaps I'll get into that in the future. Not only for kids in my household, but for children all over. Learning that homemaking is something I can have in common with folks that I don't necessarily agree with religiously or politically has been really important. It's finding that common thread where we can still skill share. I think it's important that we don't alienate other homemakers, either by enforcing our religion on them or by shaming folks who have religious practice in their homemaking. But In addition to that, it's so important that we know there are many, many kinds of homemakers who are not white, they're not heterosexual, they're not married, they might not have children, and they are not perhaps middle or upper middle class, and they are not religious. It can be really freeing for the way that we think about the kind of inclusivity we want to have with homemaking, to strip away those layers of expectation. You can be a homemaker if you're queer, if you're trans, if you're non-binary, if you are not white, if you are not married, if you are in a polyamorous relationship, if you are single, you can be a homemaker. If you have a bajillion kids, you can be a homemaker. If you have no kids, you can be a homemaker. Homemaking is a vital vocation for anyone who has a home. If you have a home, you can use the skills of a homemaker either part-time or full-time. If you see somebody that's homemaking and they don't have children, or they don't have a religious practice, or they're not married, then I would encourage you to withhold negative associations, negative judgment from that person. Someone who is engaged in homemaking that looks different than yours, whose lifestyle is different than yours, still has purpose and meaning and validity in their homemaking. And I would encourage you to find commonality, to find the ways that your work is similar, to build those threads, weave those threads of connection, to say that there is value in homemaking, even if it looks different than my homemaking. There is value in the human being who is engaged in the same career that I'm engaged in, even if their lifestyle is different than mine. I would really love for those of us who are homemakers to expand the group of people that we believe should be accessing this vocation. Let's be really careful that we're not ostracizing folks who are different than us. Let's be really careful that we are not alienating folks whose lives look different than us, whose sexuality looks different than us, whose composition of their household looks different than us. When we look at who homemakers are and who should be accessing homemaking, who we think has a right to be a homemaker, let's be careful that we are not imposing some level of misogyny where we say that it's okay for somebody to be a homemaker if they are a woman and they have kids. We understand that. We probably think they should be in the workplace, but we understand. But somebody who's perhaps non-female, somebody who maybe doesn't have kids, well, they should get a real job. Ooh, homemaking is a real job. It's a real job, y'all. And I wish that we could unpack the misogyny that is wrapped up in the thinking that homemaking is not a real job. And we could unpack the consumer capitalist notion that the only kinds of real jobs are those that are tied to a paycheck. I really want to encourage those of you, if you have been criticized for homemaking because you don't look like a typical homemaker, I want to encourage you that you belong and that your work is worthy. If you are somebody that has felt that you can't homemake because you don't have a religious framework for your homemaking, I would encourage you that there are a lot of other folks like you. And even if there are folks that are religious homemakers, maybe you can connect with them. We don't have to constantly be subdividing. And I think homemaking is a wonderful way in which we can try to unite more and more. Let's check our own internal biases. Let's check the ways that our culture has indoctrinated us to have preconceived notions about homemakers. And let's try to expand our viewpoint in a way that will benefit our whole community and also will make sure that we are forming bonds and relationships and improving our own lives and the lives of other homemakers around us. So those are my thoughts today. That was a little bit different than where I had wanted to go. I hope that you'll check out my Patreon down below. I will be back tomorrow for my permaculture garden. And don't worry, should I come down with the Rona, I'm trying the best that I can to isolate the folks in our household who are sick. If I come down with it, I have pre-recorded at least 4 videos earlier this week that are edited and ready to go. So even if I get sick, there will still be a number of other videos coming out this week. So I don't want you to feel like you're going to miss out. Hopefully I will stay well and healthy. I hope you all stay well and healthy, and I'll be back soon. Thanks.